Okay, so yeah, welcome to this SEMA P1 Masterclass webinar on ABC costing. My name is Gavin Pigeon and I have been teaching at FI for, let me share my screen, for nearly 6 years now. Okay, so I've been doing this job for nearly 6 years. Really enjoy my job. Find it very rewarding to help students through their exams. And just a little bit about myself. So yeah, Gavin Pigeon's my name, and I have a background in management accounting. Okay, so before teaching, I worked as a management accountant for about 8 years at a leading dental corporate. You might have heard of it. My Dentist is the name of the company, but it was probably the biggest dental corporate in the UK. And a lot of the things I did in that role are some of the things that we cover in papers like CIMA P1. So very much management accounting, getting involved in budgets, helping to report on the monthly P&Ls and all kinds of things like that. Some of the CIMA papers that I've taught over the years, CIMA P1 of course, CIMA F1, E1. I'm recently teaching operational case study, so there's a lot of parallels between what we learn in P1 and having to apply that to operational case study. E2, P2, and possibly one of my favourites is F3. Okay, but you've got a while until you get to that one, haven't you? Let's take a look at the CIMA P1 syllabus because, as you know, today is all about activity-based costing. I've just got a little summary of the syllabus in terms of the sections and weightings. And you may know already that activity-based costing lives within Section A, syllabus Section A. So that 30% weighting is comprised of things like traditional absorption costing and, of course, what we're talking about today, activity-based costing. What would you say, just my general kind of curiosity to this, is the most difficult part of CIMA P1? Presuming that you're familiar with what's in there to some degree. You might have not got through all the course yet, you might not know, but what do you reckon is the single most difficult part of CIMA P1? Be interested to know what you think. Just the range of information to cover. There's just a lot in that thing, isn't there? I definitely think it's the most difficult operational paper in terms of, P1, F1 and E1. I think operational case is just a different kettle of fish, but for many people, passing CIMA P1 is the biggest hurdle they face at this level. And in some respects, you could say it's one of the more difficult papers to pass in all of CIMA. So you can't underestimate how difficult a P1 exam can be. If I was saying what do I think the typical student finds the most difficult, I think the kind of things I'm thinking is variances, quite difficult, linear programming, sometimes they find quite difficult, but definitely ABC can be a tricky one as well. Okay, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. So, within this section A, you've got chapter 2, if you study with FI and if you've got the FI notes, that's devoted to activity-based costing. Okay, so let's talk about what this session is going to involve. We're going to have a recap of activity-based costing, talking about what it is. I want you to come away from this short 45 minutes webinar, it might be a bit longer, but not much longer, feeling that you understand what activity-based costing is better than you did before, okay? And we're going to run through a typical ABC type scenario, yeah? That will be in a similar style to some questions that you'll see. We're going to definitely want to get across why ABC is relevant today in the world of modern accounting, okay? We're going to talk about the different steps that you want to try and follow when you're addressing an ABC type question, okay? And does anybody know what those steps are? Before I get them on screen, before we start to walk through them, there's 4 typical steps involved in an ABC type question. Anyone know the steps that I'm referring to? Kimberly's typing, I can see. Very good. So yeah, Kimberly says you've got these cost pools, then you need the cost driver, then you need the overhead absorption rate, correct? And then you can do the absorption itself and calculate the cost per unit. And that's exactly what we're going to be running through very shortly. Once we've done that, we're going to talk about how ABC analysis can impact decisions. Think about it. If we were to do this ABC instead of perhaps marginal costing or simply traditional absorption costing, if this is what we're doing instead, this thing that is supposedly better, and we don't make better or different decisions off the back of it, then you could say it doesn't add any value at all. Only if we make some decisions on the back of knowing things to that extra detail that ABC is going to provide us with, is it worth doing? Okay, so you can apply this kind of cost benefit logic to just about anything. And if the costs of doing ABC do not compensate for the benefits, if the benefits not outweigh the costs, is a better way of saying that, then it isn't worth doing. And we're going to talk about that as well. And once we've done that, we can step back from the whole thing and think about what are the advantages and disadvantages of this method. And then what we're going to do is take a little dip into a couple of questions. We'll work through them. We'll talk about how we'd solve the questions and find the answers, and then we're done. Okay? Good to go. Happy with that. Let's have a look. So here we are. Why is ABC relevant in modern accounting? Okay. Well, let me just explain a bit of this in my own way. So first things first, ABC only really became practically possible as IT and systems began to improve. So around the 1980s, we saw the start of this IT revolution, where companies started to use computers and have more sophisticated systems with more processing power. And when they had that, they were on the right track to utilizing something like ABC. Before that, it wasn't a thing. Before that, you would have had your marginal costing or your traditional absorption costing, but ABC really come into prominence when systems were good enough to support it. Because one thing you need more of if you're going to do ABC is better information. Yeah, and that was something that came about through advancements in IT technology. Okay, so ABC allocates overheads to products based on their actual activities, offering greater accuracy than that traditional absorption approach. And having this greater accuracy on costs will of course allow us to make better decisions, as we've said. What I've got on screen now, I've used protein bars rather, because currently I'm teaching operational case study and the pre-scene is on a company that makes protein bars. So I just thought I'd go with that one. And if you look at this, try and imagine this business that makes protein bars. And let's say for the sake of keeping things simple, it makes just two different types of protein bar. Let's imagine it makes peanut bars and cashew bars, okay? If we use traditional absorption costing, it might lead us to, let's say, the following numbers on screen now. They've taken their overheads and they've divided them by what might be a basic cost driver like number of units, or maybe labor hours, or maybe even something else like machine hours. But essentially that approach may lead us to the following numbers. I mean, these numbers have been made up just to demonstrate the example. If we had more time, we could do a full kind of working and show you where they come from. But looking at these overheads here, I guess we could assume that this 24 cents here and this 24 cents here is basically saying that, of all the overheads we spend at this business, we're going to slap on 24 cents per peanut bar and 24 cents per cashew bar. Okay? Maybe that way has been calculated by just dividing overheads by the number of units. Yeah? It's not a very sophisticated way of doing it. And it can lead to under or over costing. What we've got underneath is how this might look instead if we used something like activity-based costing. So now we look at this and ABC says that, look, it was 16 cents for the peanut bars and it was 32 cents for the cashew bars. Isn't that worth knowing? It's likely that we'd be glad we know that. Now we've looked at the activities that drive these costs, we've got a greater accuracy of costing. And can anybody just tell me what types of decisions might be made if we found that out? If we initially thought it was 24 cents of overheads per bar, regardless of what type of bar it was, now we know this via ABC analysis, what kinds of decisions might we make on the back of it? Well, we might think that we make more profits when we sell a peanut bar. We might want to emphasize peanuts in our marketing. We might want to push that product more. We might want to look into adjusting the selling prices. We might think to ourselves, we ought to charge a bit more for cashew because it costs us more. Maybe we can charge a little bit less for peanuts than we originally thought and still make a decent profit. So you're getting it, yeah. Selling price or understanding our cost could help us to drive down the cost of cashews. We might say, why is it so much for cashews? What is causing that? ABC analysis would shine a light on our costs and help us to understand better why that is, double the cost of making a peanut bar. So exactly, that's what we've got. Now, taking that kind of further, let's get into the steps of performing ABC analysis. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to talk through the general kind of flow of how a ABC calculation works, and then we're going to have a little look at a question and see if we can do this for ourselves. What happens when we do ABC? Well, on the left hand side is a breakdown of overhead costs for a business, and they are given in this familiar kind of P&L style format. Every business will have its own categories, but it might have staff costs, supervisor costs, warehouse, logistics, maintenance, repairs, and other factory costs. When we do ABC, we don't want them to be in categories like this. Instead, we're going to use our ABC system to recategorize them essentially. And the ABC system would be able to do that, and it would be able to take those costs and divide them differently based on the different activities that are needed or are used when we incur these overheads. So you can see the idea. The overheads come to 412,360, and when our ABC system has recategorized them according to the different activities, we've got a different breakdown of those costs. Okay, what are those things we're looking at on the right hand side of the screen in the right box? What do we call them? Of course, these things that we've got that are usually given in a SEMA P1 question, that are the starting point of those calculation type questions. What do they of course cost? They're not drivers. They are instead cost pools. They are the different cost pools. We've put some costs into what are setups. We've put certain costs into what relates predominantly to quality type costs, etc. So you're looking at cost pools, and they will be generally given in a SEMA question. But I just put this slide together so that you can appreciate that it's just a different way of categorizing our overhead costs in a way that isn't as familiar to most people when they look at P&Ls. The system will do that with the help of the accountants running this. So we've got our cost pools. We've got the step 1 numbers on screen. Then, of course, going back to the steps that we was talking about before, we're going to have to find the relevant cost drivers to these cost pools. So I've got those same numbers on screen now. We're taking it a step further. And you can see on the left-hand side, we've got those same cost pools. But now what we've done is we have looked at and assigned relevant cost drivers. So what do you think is predominantly going to drive your setup costs? Number of setups seems pretty logical. More setups, more setup costs. Less setups, lower setup costs. And I reckon there's a good few people who do plenty of questions on this stuff without fully kind of realizing what a setup is, because you would have seen setups in various P1 questions. It's a popular cost pool that they use in questions. Let's just think, what is a setup? If we're making a product, maybe making chairs or protein bars, depending on the level of variety and the level of variability in our products, we might have more or less setups. Stopping and starting, recalibrating the machines, repositioning things so they can make a slightly different variant on our product. Yeah, they can adjust so they make a slightly different size. All of these things are the kind of stopping and starting and setting up that we find on a production factory floor. Now, the number's been given here. It says it's 588 setups. When we look at a question, we'll be thinking, how do we find that number out? We've got the number of quality inspections. That could be a decent cost driver to use on quality costs. More inspections, more cost. Less inspections, less cost. Yeah, it's probably not the only thing that drives the cost, but for the sake of the P1 style question, we'll be thinking, let's set one cost driver. As you can imagine, in the real world, this thing could be, more complicated than this example is here. Number of material requisitions, maybe number of orders. And when we've got other, and in the real world, you're often going to find you've just got some other stuff that can't go into any special cost pool because it's all just a bit too random, bits and bats. You might find that with this other, you find a little bit of traditional absorption is what you're going to do. So maybe labour hours is the one for us here. It could be machine hours or something else, but we're saying labour hours in this, okay? And what do we do next? Well, we take the step 2 and we move to step 3 and we find we've got this overhead absorption rate, which we're going to see on the next slide. Okay, before we do, however, I've got a little question for you here, just to think about. What are some of the associated costs with establishing an ABC approach? Maybe this business did traditional absorption before and now it's doing ABC. What do you think are going to be some of the associated costs of getting this information? Knowing we've got 588 setups, knowing we've got 4,160 separate orders. What do you think are some of the costs of doing ABC is what I'm asking. Any ideas? Well, I think the costs might involve system upgrades. It might involve training your staff. It might take those staff longer to conduct ABC analysis. So you've got those general kind of costs being higher if you're doing ABC is what we're saying. But once we've got that, and once we've got the cost driver information pulling from our systems, we've got the ability to calculate these specific cost driver rates, or as I've called them here, overhead absorption rates by cost pool. So what have we got? We've simply taken the setup cost in that example, which you remember was 164944, and we've divided it by the number of setups that occurs across this factory. And we're saying that on average, it's going to cost about $280.52 every time you have a setup. Is that number, perfect and flawless in itself? Because a lot of people get this idea that ABC gives you the very perfect, accurate cost. It's not perfect. It's just better than the alternatives like traditional absorption costing. When it comes to a setup, some setups might take 10 minutes. Other setups might take 2 hours. Setups might be small, setups might be large. But on average, at least what we're saying is we think it's about $280 per setup. Okay? And that's our cost driver rate for this. Every time we have a quality inspection, some might very well take longer than others, but the average we're going for is 67.60, and so on and so forth. Is this making sense? This is step 3. You've seen it before, perhaps. This is what we do. And you only really appreciate how useful activity-based costing is when we look at step 4. Now what we're going to do for this is we'll just take setups, because I'm eager to get to the questions and I don't want this to take up all the time. But if we just take setups, for instance, and we stick with this $280 average we think a setup incurs every time we stop the machine, recalibrate it, change it, position it. What are we doing with that? Well, what we've done in this example, and this is really our step 4 now, absorption, find the cost, setup cost per unit, etc. Is we've got some more information. And I'm telling you now, this business makes chairs. And they sell two types of chairs now. Yeah, they sell a chair called the Taskmaster 300, which is I'll tell you a little bit about this chair. It's pretty standard. It's pretty kind of basic. It comes in one main size, one main finish, one colour. And it's very much kind of a stack it high, sell them cheap kind of chair. We might even call it a cost leader. You might remember that from Porter, if you've done some of that E1 stuff. And we've got another type of chair. This second type of chair is called the Lux Ergo Prestige. Well, this is the special, higher quality, differentiated chair. And we can see that we make a lot more units of the basic chair and fewer units of the Lux Ergo Prestige. Those setups that we were given before, which I told you were 588, we've now got broken down by two products. And can anyone tell me anything interesting or anything significant about these two chairs so far? I mean, which one is the most intensive in terms of the setups that it has attributable to it? Well, I'm looking at this, and if they only make 2,400 of these special chairs, and they've got nearly as many setups as they have for the high volume one, that is much more intensive in terms of the setups. And what we do with that information in a question, what we could do with that information in a question, is we can work out this setup per unit figure. So obviously, if we were to look at a setup or look at a chair and think, how much of a setup is attributable to just one chair? Yeah, it's obviously a lot less than one because we don't set up every chair. We don't even do that for the Prestige. But you can see how we've got this number. And how have we got this number? We've basically taken the setups for the Taskmaster and divided it by the number of chairs we're making. It must mean that every chair has about 0.01875 setups attributable to it. And if we go for the other chair that we already know is a lot more intensive in terms of the setups, we take 288 over 2400, and that tells us that it's like 0.12 setups per chair. And where do we go from there? Well, this is when it starts to get interesting, because when we've got those numbers, we're going to multiply the setup per unit by the average cost per setup that we got in step 3, and find out that when it comes to making these Taskmaster 300s, it's about $5.26 in terms of setup cost per chair. But when it comes to making a Lux Ergo Prestige, it's much more. Yeah, it's more than 6 times the cost. It's seriously more setup intensive. There's a lot of faff, there's a lot of stopping and starting, there's a lot of mess when it comes to making this second type of chair. And that's where the thing becomes useful. And of course, if we were doing the whole thing in detail, where we might go from there is we'd do that for all the other cost pools. We'd split out those cost pools across the two types of chair. And maybe we'd have a situation like this. Now we've got the full costing of the chair. It's really useful to look at because we can see that it costs us significantly less in overheads to make a Taskmaster 300. It costs us significantly more in overheads to make a Lux Ergo Prestige, the special chair. And if we were to compare that to what we might find under that basic traditional absorption costing approach, where maybe we use something like labour hours and nothing else for everything, we could find that it tells us something very new about these chairs that we didn't know before. I mean, what is the conclusion? And it's the same as what I asked when I was talking about the protein bars. We have learned, if this was the exercise we conducted, if these are the numbers we got, that it costs us less than we thought to make a Taskmaster 300 and a lot more than we thought to make a Lux Ergo Prestige. What types of decisions might we then make on the back of knowing this? And I'll ask that afresh. Think about it. We might do the following. We might consider charging more for the special chair. We might be willing to reduce our price on the Taskmaster 300 basic chair. We might want to know how we can get that 8467 down so we can make that Luxergo more profitable. And if you're looking at this, you might think to yourself, how are we going to get the setup cost down? Because that 3366 is just more than we want to pay. Yeah? Well, we might think about this. What if I told you the Lux Ergo Prestige came in lots of different colours, lots of different sizes, with lots of different specifications to choose from? Yeah, you've got all this customization available when you buy the special chair. You can ask for it to have, special arms, special kind of adjustable elements. You can even get versions that have heated seats and versions that don't, etc., etc. All that sounds like a lot of setups to me. And you can imagine, can't you, what you might do with that? You might think to yourself, let's look at our sales data. What if I was to tell you that using something like Pareto analysis, which is not what we're talking about today, but just thinking about that, we found that 80% of our Luxergo sales were on 20% of those kind of customizations that I mentioned. Most people bought just these types. And the other 20% of sales was for all that kind of extra customization that few people want, but some people do. And I'd be looking at that thinking, maybe what we need to do is reduce the customization that we offer. That should bring down those setups, and that should bring down those costs. And that's exactly what ABC is all about. It's all about getting under the bonnet and shining light on your cost base and understanding why they're so high, if they are, and crucially understanding how you can bring them down without compromising the specialness of this Luxergo Prestige chair. Yeah. So it's about that. It's about understanding your costs. You can, even in extreme cases, come along and think to yourself, well, we're not going to sell a Luxergo Prestige because we don't make any money on it. We can't charge more. They won't pay it. Competitors are selling it for this. We're going to discontinue it. So it might even lead to situations where you discontinue products, is what we're saying. And that is the usefulness of this. And how ABC analysis can impact decisions. Well, we've just said all of this. We've got a slide saying it, but I've just said it. Yeah, it can influence the pricing decisions. It can influence which chairs we focus on and drive in our marketing and which ones we don't. It can even tell us which chairs or products we might wish to discontinue, etc. Is that making sense? Are you getting the gist of this? Because remember, you've not just got to get through a CIMA P1 exam question. You've got to also get through operational case. And as I say to my operational case students, CIMA P1 is the biggest part of case. And this is a big part of P1. So they will definitely go for this kind of thing. And you won't just have to get the right number in a question. You might have to explain in a chunky set of paragraphs, over 300 words or more, what is going on, why this thing is useful, as I've just explained. Now, stepping back from all of that, hopefully that makes sense. We can summarize the advantages and disadvantages like so. We can say that it improves costing accuracy. And you could see with that chair example how useful that was to know. It gives us better control of our costs. It identifies non-value activities. Maybe in that example before, we found out that offering too much choice on the Luxergo led to too high setup costs that a lot of it was non-value added. Maybe we find that excessively checking some of these and leading to too many inspections, some of it is non-value added. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but it's going to help us to find out where we're spending money, without the kind of benefits that go with it, non-value added. All leads to better decisions, as we've said. Disadvantages, we said it's expensive to run this stuff sometimes. You need complex systems. It's going to take time. It's going to take people longer to do in the accounts team, possibly. And it's going to cost more. It will require a different way of doing something. And you can often, therefore, say things like change management might also be part of that story. Yeah, think about how E1 change management comes into play. And it's not suitable for all companies. What about this? You're a business that has very small overheads as a proportion of your overall cost. Overheads is just a slither of your total cost. And the way you make your products is pretty straightforward and simple, pretty old school. Does that business really want to spend a load of money and time doing ABC analysis when overheads isn't even a big deal and it's pretty straight cut anyway? It's very much all about the labour hours. More labour hours, more costs. No, they don't want it. They're going to be fine, possibly, with the traditional simple absorption way, or even simpler still marginal costing. So it's not for every business, but certainly complex businesses that make tricky things and have a big chunk of their costs as total overheads might be very well suited to using ABC. Okay, so now we've done that, it's time to just look at a few questions. Any questions so far on anything that I've said? Is that making sense? Are you seeing what this essential recap on ABC is trying to get across, the point of it, why it's useful? So what we'll do is we'll look at a few questions then. And let's have a think about this one and see if you can get there with the answer. So I'll read it. This is very much a kind of CIMA P1 style question, exam style question. It says GG Co. recently introduced an ABC costing system. And GG Co makes two types of electric blanket. I've made this question, I called it after electric blankets because I've just suddenly discovered how amazing electric blankets are. I thought they were just for old people well, just for old people, but I've got them all over the house. It's great. Saving a fortune on my electric and gas. Anyway, they've got two types of electric blanket. And these are the budgeted amounts that they expect to produce. It tells us about the batch size, it tells us about the machine setups per batch, and it tells us about the processing time in minutes. And then if we look underneath, it says the budgeted annual costs for the two activities are as follows. Can someone just answer me this? What are those two things I'm looking at now? What are machine setups and processing? What do we call those, of course? Yeah. They are cost pools. Yeah, they are cost pools. They've given us two cost pools. Right. And what does it want to know? Well, it wants to know this. The budgeted processing cost per unit of the heat hugger 2.0 is what it wants to know. So it doesn't want the full cost. It just wants to know what are the processing costs per unit of heat hugger. And that's exactly where a SEMA P1 question will go. It won't be as big as the example we had on screen before. It's going to be just a bit of it. Anyone know how we're going to get there? How we're going to work this one out? And think of those 4 steps. This is one way we could do it. And think about this. It'd be great if someone gets the answer before I show you the answer. But what we're going to do is this. We're going to take the cost pool, the 112,000, yeah? 112,000. And we're going to divide it by what? The cost driver. What is the cost driver going to be in this question? Yeah, it's going to be minutes, isn't it? It's going to be minutes, perfect. And we're going to find that quite easily, aren't we? We're going to find that quite easily because all we're going to do is we are going to look at the number of processing minutes for a heat hugger, that's 4. Look at the processing minutes of a snuggle vault. Yeah, we want that as well. We want all the minutes. And just times those numbers by the respective units we're making. And if you do all of that, what is the number you get? And we've already got an answer coming in from Alice. Yeah. But if we do this, and let's do it just briefly together. Let's do it just here. I've just gone onto a little spreadsheet so I can work this with you so you can just see my workings. we're going to have like the processing costs as the cost pool, yeah? 112,000. We're going to want the number of minutes, processing minutes, which of course we can just quickly get by doing what I just said, which will be 70 times 4 plus 90,000 times 6. So let's do that. Okay. And once we've got that number, we can divide that by that and we get the following. So in dollars, let's say, we've got this. That is our step 3 overhead absorption rate. That's the, cost per processing minute. That's not our answer though, is it? What we do then is we say, look, it's 4 minutes for this heat hugger that we're talking about. So therefore it's going to be that times 4 minutes, and literally that is what you do. 55, well done, Alice and the others who got that. That's going to be answer B. Now on these slides, which I'm using now, you can download them, you can access them on this room if you didn't know that. So they're available where you see CIMA P1 Masterclass. That is the slides I'm using. So you can use them if they're useful. But it's only a short session, so it's there. But B is the answer there. And when you look at the next slide, it'll just give you my workings to what we just did. Yeah, 55 cents. Making sense. Let's do another. Well, what we've got now is the same question, well, the same information, just a different question. Now it's asking something a little trickier. It's saying, what is the machine or the budgeted machine setup costs per unit of Snuggle Vault? So it wants the setup cost per unit of the second type of blanket now. Who can do this? Who can get me the answer first? 14 people on this class. Who's going to win and get the answer first? And the key is, you've been given the batch size. That isn't the number of batches, but you can work out the number of batches. Think about that. And once you've got the number of batches, you can easily get to the number of setups, and you add them together like we did before. And you've got your cost pool, setup costs, divided by your total number of setups, of course, like we said before. And then you're going to get to your kind of step 3 number, your cost driver rate. And that's one way you could do it. There's another way you could do it. Once you get to your cost driver rate, you're thinking, right, how much of a setup is in one of these Snuggle Vaults? We times them and we've got it. And another way we could do it, and I'll show you the solution in a minute, why is he doing that, is maybe we could find out how many setups are across the Snuggle Vault overall. Divide that by the total number of setups once we've got those numbers. And then just take the setup costs and multiply it by that to get the total setup costs across the Snuggle Vault. Split that 195k across the heat hugger and the Snuggle Vault, and then it's just a case of dividing it by 90,000, isn't it? You could get there that way. Both ways work. But we've got an answer coming in from Alice. Has anyone else got an answer as well? So Alice is thinking answer D for this. Saki is thinking the same. Let's have a look. Yeah, see if you understand these workings. Because let's be honest, some of these questions in the P1 exam will take a bit longer than others, won't they? And this is the kind of question that does take a little bit longer. I mean, this is a bit more long-winded than the one we did before it. Okay. Here's what we should have done. It was answer D, so well done. If you got answer D, you've got a reasonably good kind of ground in this stuff. And it was 137. Yeah. Why was it 137? Follow what I've done. Let's just dive into step 3 because we've got the number for step 1 and we're going to find the number for step 2 just here. But let's set up our overhead absorption rate first if we want to. You put in the step 1 figure there. Probably a better colour to highlight. Let me use something a bit better than that. Yeah. And next what you've got to do is go off and work out how many setups you've got. Well, I've got a little work in doing that here, you see. Yeah? And if you see what I've done, I've worked out the number of batches first. How have I got the number of batches? Well, let's just take the heat hugger because we need to do it for both of them. The heat hugger, as it says in the question, has 120 in each batch and it makes 70,000 altogether. Yeah, think about it. If you take 120 divided by 70,000, you're going to work out, yeah, rather the other way around, sorry, 70,000 divided by 120. That's wrong what I've got there. It should be the other way around. Silly me. You're going to find out that in each batch, there must be 583. Yeah, sorry. There must be 583 batches altogether. So I've got mixed up there because I've seen a slight little error in my workings. But it's 583 batches is what I'm saying. Okay? 70,000 divided by 120 in each batch. 583 of the things. And there must be 1,500 batches for the Snuggle Vault. Because if you've got 90,000 of the things that you're making and each batch is 60 in size, there must be 1,500 batches, mustn't there? And once you've got that number, you're just going to multiply that figure by the 3 setups for that one, heat hugger, and the 2 setups per for the other. Yeah. And then you work out, so it's 1,500 times 2. Sorry, these have been made, sort of proof them a bit more. I can see. I will fix them and send them out. It's just a slight different, like typo there. 1,500 times 2. Then you've got the total number of setups, haven't you? Then you've got this figure. And once you've got that figure, you've got your overhead absorption rate. And what does that mean? It means that on average, every setup costs us $41.05. Every setup costs us $41.05. And you can do it a few ways, but this way I'm talking about now, this way I've got here, is going to then think, right, okay, if every setup is $41.05, the next question becomes, how much of a setup is attributable to each unit of the Snuggle Vault? Yeah, because we know there's a little tiny bit of a fraction of a setup per unit. It's nowhere near 1, because it'd be insane if you set up every single time you make a different one. But there's a little fraction of a setup attributable to that. And if you think about it, you're just saying the following. If you have 3,000 setups when it comes to the Snuggle Vault, and if you divide that number by the fact that you're making 90,000 of the things, it tells you you've got 0.0333 of a setup per unit. And as soon as you've got that, it's that times that, $1.37. Answer D. Answer D. Yeah, $1.37. Made a few little errors there. Oh dear, don't like a bit more proofing next time. Answer D. Answer D. Okay. Happy with that? Do you think you could do a similar question next time round? Maybe try that one again. Look at my workings and try it again. Okay. One more question, then we're done. Thanks. Naomi finds it a lot clearer. Good. That's my intention. One more question before we're done. Let's look at a question that doesn't involve any calculations. A quick wordy one. I'll look at the requirement first. Which of the above statements are true? Okay, simple. Some of these questions can be select all that applies. It's one. I've not stated which one. It's not a proper exam question. It's in the same style. But let's just keep our options open and decide what we think. So we'll tick the things that we think are true and we'll cross the things that we think are false. Okay? All right then. You tell me what you think. Put a T or an F in the box to tell me which ones you think. Well, let's start with the first one. And we could just call them A, B, and C, and D, which, we've not got there, but let's just say that so we know which one. Let's look at A. ABC is a form of absorption costing. Well, that is true. It's a form. It's more sophisticated, it's more time consuming, it's more accurate, but it is just another form of absorption. We're trying to absorb at the end of the day. Yeah? ABC is not suitable to use in a service business that doesn't produce physical goods, as such a business doesn't have production overheads? What do you think? Can you use this thing at a solicitor's? Could you use this thing for a service business? I think you could. I don't think it's going to work as well necessarily, because when you're talking about a service business, you've got a lot more kind of, what's the big word? Yeah, it's a lot more heterogeneous. It's not a word I use often. Every time someone walks in, they might want something slightly different. But when you come and buy an electric blanket, it's either the first one or the second one. It's more standardized in a production business and less standardized in a service business, but you can still use them. I can think of all types of examples where we can. So that statement is false. You could do customer profitability analysis on you could do all kinds. Where ABC is used instead of traditional absorption, it will likely lead, think about this, to higher absorbed overheads for high volume and lower complexity products. Out of those two chairs we looked at, which one was that? Which one was the high volume, low complexity chair? It was the Taskmaster 300, the one on the left hand side. When you used ABC in that example, which was pretty typical, it actually showed that the high volume, low complexity one was cheaper than you thought. So very much the opposite of that statement. ABC is always more appropriate than traditional absorption, where multiple products are being produced using different levels of resources. Whenever you see the word always in a CIMA style question, it's often not valid, because there's usually some instance of where it's not always. Yeah. And I can think, if you're a nice simple business with very small overheads making something simple, and I think of Uncle Joe's mint balls in Wigan for some reason when I think of that, do they need to do ABC? No, they don't. Is it worth it? Probably not. Is it worth the effort? No way. So there we are. It was, after all, A, and Amy was quick to the mark there getting that. And that's the kind of, not at A, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Yeah. So yeah, I hope you found that short session useful. So we had a look at 3 questions and went through what it is, and hopefully that's helped. Yeah, nice, quick, to the point revision session. Hopefully you took something away from that. So all the best, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, and good luck with your CIMA studies. All the best. Thanks very much. Thank you.